If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com. Thank you.
Greetings and welcome once again to our program. I'm Larry Wessels, Director of Christian Answers, and I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm joined here in studio with our Director of Research, Steve Morrison. Steve, great to have you, brother.
Thank you. Good to be here.
As usual. Well, I guess in a way I'm happy to be here, but on the other hand, I'm a little unhappy. And the reason is we were supposed to have an actual debate today in studio. We were challenged for debate by actually a friend of yours. I don't think we'll mention his name, but he used to be a Christian in apologetics and everything, and I guess he apostatized from faith. Seen some of our TV shows up in Dallas, and challenged for debate, and we accepted the debate. We had 6 months to get ready for the debate, and in fact, I was up till 4:30 in the morning last night just doing my final notes in preparation for this debate. And about 10 minutes before he was scheduled to arrive here, he gave me a call and said he wasn't coming. And that was most unfortunate. I've had other people and other religious persuasions bow out of debates, even when they initially challenged for debate, much as this atheist did. But usually they'd have the courtesy to do it a lot sooner than 10 minutes before the debate. But unfortunately, we're having no debate today as far as with an actual atheist. So to sort of go ahead and use the material that was put together for this debate, we're going to do a mock debate with actual atheists. We have debate clips with one of the most famous atheists of all, Madalyn Murray O'Hare of the American Atheist Center. We have debate clips coming from Sheila Thompson of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We have another atheist named Dan Barker, who is associated with the same organization and used to be a Protestant minister, and then he apostatized from the faith and now is a very vocal atheist. As well as another member of the American Atheist Center, Brian Lynch, who is very vociferous in his denials of the existence of God. So since the actual atheist didn't show up, much to my chagrin here, we're going to take on these other atheists, but in a more canned version of it. Now, in the original debate format that we had planned, Steve here was supposed to be the moderator for the debate. But Steve, I guess in a way you're going to join me in this mock debate against these atheists who I just introduced in our apologetic, you might say, our Christian apologetic against their argumentation. And then the viewers at home will be able to see how the atheists are arguing, and they'll be able to see how we deal with the situation. But since there are no actual live and living color atheists here right now, that means that I get to go first. So the way we were going to start this debate was with a 12-minute opening statement. And the atheists were going to get or in this case, the one atheist was going to get a 5-minute rebuttal, and then we were going to change places. He was going to get a 12-minute opening statement and so forth, and then I was going to rebut, and then we're going to go into a round table. Obviously, with no actual atheists here, I will do my 12-minute opening statement. After all, I stayed up till 4:30 in the morning to do this. And then the guy doesn't show up. But anyway, I'll do this, and then we'll play the clips, and then for the next 2 hours, we'll give the viewer at home hopefully a good idea of how the atheists think, how they argue, and what the Christian response is to all these so-called high and mighty intellectual arguments for the non-existence of God that the atheists use. Now, Steve, as we begin this mock debate, I'd like you, as you would have done if the actual atheist had showed up, but like I said, he called at the last moment. Everyone else who's backed out of debates with us usually calls way before the date of the debates to save a lot of time and trouble. But to actually wait 10 minutes before the debate and then call and say you're not coming, that's a little different. But I guess if you're an atheist, you're not restricted by what might be wrong or what might be right. But anyway, you were going to give a bio sketch of me and, of course, of the atheist. But now, since I'm the one giving the opening statement, I guess you can give a brief bio sketch of me for the viewers at home who may not know much about me.
All right, we'll skip the atheist.
Yes. And that's it, since he's not here anyway. And then I'll begin my 12-minute opening statement to begin this mock debate with all these atheists.
Okay. Larry Wessels is Director of Christian Answers, an international Christian missionary evangelism organization specializing in apologetics and doctrinal Bible study. Larry was a member of the National Honor Society and who's who among American high school students while in high school. Larry graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in advertising, and 1 week after graduation, on May 16, 1981, he was born again by the Spirit of God. Larry has advertised Jesus Christ ever since. He has served as assistant editor and columnist of the Believer's Guide magazine, director of Dayspring Evangelism, assistant to the director of the Research and Education Foundation, and has been active in university campus evangelism, radio outreach, and live recorded television for over 20 years. Larry has participated in numerous formal and informal debates with representatives of all types of belief systems during the course of his Christian walk.
Thank you, Steve. And with that, I'll begin my opening statement in this mock debate with the list of atheists that we have prepared in this program. Anthony Flew, the British author of Atheistic Humanism, Darwinian Evolution, and A Rational Animal, an avowed atheist for over 50 years, has acknowledged he has reconsidered his former philosophy and has moved toward a theistic belief. Flew is a former professor at Oxford, Aberdeen, Kiel, and Reading universities in England. The 82-year-old professor now says that scientific evidences has led him to a belief in God. Gordon Stein, editor of the book An Anthology of Atheism and Rationalism, and still an atheist, by the way, says that an atheist is a person without a belief in God. Atheism is not a belief as such. It is a lack of belief, end quote. However, atheists attempt this definition for only one reason: to allow themselves to bring in any ideas they wish without having to prove anything. But in so doing, they have rendered atheism incapable of falsification or verification. And if it is true, as they claim when attacking theism, the belief in God, that a word or an idea is nonsense, if it is not capable of falsification or verification, then atheism is nonsense and should be dismissed as meaningless. Only by radically changing the rules of the game in this way can atheists get away with this patently dishonest maneuver. Madalyn Murray O'Hare, the famous atheist of the American Atheist Center here in Austin, Texas, who, by the way, slammed the door in my face, but that's another story, who was later murdered by one of her fellow atheist co-workers, stated that someone who said they could absolutely prove that God did not exist was, quote, crazy as hell, end quote. And that's taken from a radio debate which she participated in with John Warwick Montgomery in 1967 on a Long John Neville show. Even Madalyn Murray O'Hair recognized that an atheist could not prove that God did not exist. She simply said that the basis of her atheism was, quote, not totally logical, but in part intuition, in part my own adventures in living, trying to interpret from history with perception, feeling, emotion, end quote. She went on to say, quote, we will order our lives as if there is no God. We will stand on our own feet. And then, of course, the end of the quote there, and just to reemphasize, as if there is no God. Madalyn Murray O'Hair simply lived her life by a religious faith she had that God was not out there, simply hoping that this was actually the case, even though she could not prove it. To this O'Hair example, Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project, arguably the most important biological project of the 20th century, can be quoted. Collins, who was a vigorous atheist up until the age of 27, but now a convinced theist, says, quote, of all choices, atheism requires the greatest faith, as it demands that one's limited store of human knowledge is sufficient to exclude the possibility of God, end quote. Atheism is simply a religious faith or hope that God does not exist. In a sense, it is a corrupted form of basic wish fulfillment by the atheist. The atheist wishes or hopes that God does not exist so that he, the atheist, can replace God with his own personal subjective opinions as to how life ought to be lived. Therefore, the oughtness of how to live is determined by the atheist rather than, let's say, an eternally self-existent being greater than the known contingent universe who could declare the, for example, 10 Commandments as the proper way of living. The evidence of modern archaeology is that religion has not evolved upwards, but degenerated from monotheism to pantheism and polytheism. Then from these to animism and atheism, a finding confirmed by the Scottish academic Andrew Lang in his book, The Making of Religion. Quote, of the existence of a belief in the supreme being among primitive tribes, there is as good evidence as we possess for any fact in the ethnographic region, end quote. In the history of Sanskrit literature, the Oriental expert Max Muller, recognized as the founder of the science of the history of religions, came to the conclusion, quote, there is a monotheism that precedes the polytheism of the Vedas. And even in the invocations of the innumerable gods, the remembrance of a God, one and infinite, breaks through the mist of idolatrous phraseology like the blue sky that is hidden by passing clouds, end quote. In the book, The Religion of Ancient Egypt, Sir Flinders Petrie, universally acknowledged as one of the world's leading Egyptologists, claimed, quote, whenever we can trace back polytheism to its earliest stages, we find that it results from combinations of monotheism, end quote. In Semitic mythology, the Oxford intellectual Stephen Langdon, one of the greatest experts in his field, said, quote, in my opinion, the history of the oldest civilization of man is a rapid decline from monotheism to extreme polytheism and widespread belief in evil spirits. It is, in a very true sense, the history of the fall of man, end quote. The idea that religion itself is something man invented has proved just as baseless. When the British naturalist Charles Darwin went to Tierra del Fuego in 1833, he believed that he had discovered aborigines with no religion at all. There are atheists today who still lean heavily on this, in spite of the fact that a scholar who went to the region after Darwin and spent many years learning the language, history, and customs of the Fuegians reported that their idea of God was well developed and that he found, quote, no evidence that there was ever a time when God was not known to them, end quote. The same overall picture emerges in studies centered on the traditions of the oldest traditions known to man. Original belief in a high God, followed by degeneration into polytheism, animism, atheism, and other corrupt religious notions. The viewer watching at home must keep in mind that no one is born an atheist, but rather from childhood believe in God. The belief in a supreme being is inbred into every human soul and cannot be erased no matter how hard atheists deny the existence of God. What is known about most atheists is that they did not start out being atheists. Even Madalyn Murray O'Hair was raised in the church, went to church, and later had her kids baptized into the church. Usually something happens in the life of the person when they throw away their belief and faith in God for any variety of reasons. Perhaps a death in the family, perhaps being jilted by a lover, perhaps a crippling disease, an accidental tragedy. Someone argues that the Bible is not true and is full of mistakes. Maybe hypocrites in the church, maybe the theory of evolution, and that we all came from monkeys and apes or space aliens, or possibly the most common reasons, immorality, such as adultery, fornication, alcoholism, greed, drugs, lust, and a long list of things that people intuitively know a righteous and holy God does not approve of. Atheists consciously throw the knowledge of God they possess out by any number of self-deceptive methodologies to make themselves feel better about the way they are living their lives. The irony here is that atheists spend the rest of their lives fighting against what they say is a non-existent God. If God is non-existent, then why bother about it? Atheists bother with the God they say does not exist because in their hearts they hate God and the ways of God. They do not want God to rule over them, and they resent others who actually believe in God and try to live their lives according to God's morally just laws. Atheistic religious belief systems are predicated on self-deception methodologies that try to help the atheist ease his conscience about the existence of God. The atheist tries to convince himself that if he can find enough mistakes in the Bible, then God must not exist, but this does not logically follow. God can still exist even if a typo in a book can be found. Madalyn Murray O'Hair says that she does not know out of nothing, nothing comes, and she does not care. She says she has no idea how man got on this planet and will make no attempt to explain. In other words, Madalyn is saying, quote, I don't know how we got here, I just know God didn't do it. That's just great logic and rationality. Basically, she's saying, don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up. Once again, just because Madalyn doesn't believe God created the universe doesn't mean that God didn't really create the universe. Has Madalyn missed the point also that if just one theist in all of human history was right, the case for the existence of God would be established? How can she make an intelligent assertion that God does not exist and at the same time admit that her thoughts are determined by chemical reactions? This is what atheists and materialists believe, and not by rational analysis. Huge swaths of atheistic argument lean heavily on laws of logic, which are held to be absolute, universal, and invariable. Yet in a materialistic universe, these immaterial laws can only be matters of convention or consensus, subject to the kind of change that might, at least theoretically, lead to something accepted as logical becoming illogical. Can atheists seriously live with that? Can it really be said that logic is cultural and therefore flexible? If not, how can atheists account for the laws of logic without a transcendent lawgiver? Is there any atheistic explanation as to why such laws exist, or why they can be trusted as being reliable? Without transcendent intelligence putting the laws of logic and reason into place, how can we explain the mind's capacity to move logically from premises to conclusions? How can we trust this thinking process? Theists claim that the laws of logic reflect the way God thinks and the way He wants us to think, and that if God did not exist, we could not logically prove anything. Can atheism find a basis on which to counter this claim? I think not. If the mind is the product of evolution, how can we be sure that at this point in time it is anywhere near ultimate truth or reality? If logic is by cultural convention, as atheists say, then how do they know it won't change tomorrow? Without universal, invariant, transcendent laws of logic, there is no logic, just confusion. How about this example of logic? The problem of evil does not negate the existence of God. It actually requires it. 1. If God does not exist, transcendent, objective values of good and evil do not exist. 2. Evil does exist. 3. Therefore, objective values exist, and some things are really, basically, fundamentally bad. 4. Therefore, God exists. In conclusion, I can easily say atheism is false because 1, it is philosophically absurd. 2, scientifically absurd. 3, morally bankrupt. 4, socially destructive. 5, aesthetically impotent. And 6, humanly degrading. And as the course of this debate goes on, we'll establish all these points in much more detail. We should put our trust in God and not in those that hate Him. That was my opening statement for this mock debate, since the actual atheist didn't show up. But Steve, any comments on that before we go to our clips of our representative atheists?
Well, Larry, one thing you said is that you have to believe in a God to have a basis for laws of logic or to have basis or anything, and an atheist would have nothing to stand on. Now, so if there's no God, there's no nothing, then it's like, who can say that anything is true if we're just product of evolution? Maybe our thought processes are all, hopefully, totally biased. Now, another view of atheism was said by, I believe, David Prentice. It said everybody believes in God, even an atheist. Now, because if you define God as something that's all-powerful and been here forever, atheists believe in God too, but the name of their God is random chance. And so do you think that random chance created everything and sustains everything, or do you think that an intelligent being creates and everything? So unless you're the person's the kind of atheist that says my God is random chance, there's no basis for saying that there's logical discussion on anything.
That's right. In fact, as the viewers are about to find out from listening to some of these upcoming clips from actual atheists, including Madalyn Murray O'Hare herself, you'll find in these debates, and as I mentioned here in this opening statement, that she argues that out of nothing comes. She doesn't know that as a fact. She doesn't even care where we came from or how we got here. And see, that kind of goes back to support what you're saying, that as you just said, with a belief system like that, well, then anything can go. It could be blind chance as your God, and it can be...
It just kind of punts on the whole question.
Exactly. And basically, as we'll find out from listening to these representative atheists that we'll be presenting in this televised series, that they want to assert there's no God. They want to call you crazy. They want to call a theist who believes in God a nut or an insane person or things of that nature, but at the same time, they don't want to establish their own position. They don't want to have to defend their own atheism, which is a religious belief. Atheism is just as much a religion as any other religion out there, like Hinduism or Buddhism, Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormonism, or any religion you care to take a swing at. The atheists are just as religious as any other religious group. And in fact, I can even tell you a story here before we get to these clips of when I went to the American Atheist Convention. Their national convention was held here in Austin, Texas. It must have been 18 years ago now, it seems like, from the time we're filming this. But I didn't go there to preach the gospel to them or anything. I just went there to pick up their tracts and literature. I picked up their magazines, their little tracts showing why the Bible's full of errors. And let me tell you, when they were trying to show contradictions in the Bible with their little tracts, it was a joke. It was obvious they didn't even know what the Bible said. They had no clue as to what the Bible meant in context. When you take a book or a literature, such as books like this, this is an excellent book. Examine the evidence. In fact, as long as I'm talking about books, I want to get this in before I forget about it. Here's an excellent book that I recommend anybody. It's called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." It's by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. Excellent reference if you're dealing with atheists. And another great book, which I spent a lot of time in getting ready for this debate. I was preparing for this debate for the last 2 months at least. But another excellent book is by John Blanchard, "Does God Believe in Atheists?" These two books should be in any Christian's arsenal, his library, if he's going to have to deal with atheists on any kind of regular basis. So I heartily recommend these books to you, the viewers out there. They're just packed with great information to help the Christian in dealing with atheists who don't like to defend their position. And there's a reason why atheists don't want to defend their position. Is because it's indefensible. That's why. So they try to, instead of defend themselves, they try to attack you, the person who believes in God. So anyway, these are great resources here to help you out. Okay, with that said, let me go back to the story before I went off on a tangent. So I'm at this atheist convention over there, the national convention. I'm not there to preach the gospel because Jesus said, after all, in Matthew chapter 7, don't cast the pearls of the gospel before the swine of unbelief. And I can't think of a better herd of unbelief than an atheist convention. So I didn't even bother. I just went there to see what made them tick, pick up their literature. And I ended up talking to the editor of the American Atheist magazine at that time. I forget his name now, so long ago, but I just happened to be talking to him there, and he told me that he became an atheist, because I asked me how he ended up being an atheist, because no one starts out as an atheist. You have to sear your conscience. You have to, throw away your reason and just be into maybe the stuff I described in the opening statements to want to turn to atheism. But anyway, in his case, he said he was studying to become a Lutheran minister at a Lutheran seminary, and he was taking his classes. And all they did in this Lutheran seminary was trash the Bible, saying that, well, Moses didn't write Moses and Daniel didn't write Daniel. I'm looking at Steve here, he knows all this stuff. That's what happens in these liberal seminaries. They just tear the Bible to pieces and say, well, the guys who said they wrote it didn't really write it, and it's combinations put together later and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, this Lutheran seminary that's supposed to teach him how to be a pastor of a Lutheran church actually destroyed his faith in God, and he fell away from the church as a result of that and became an atheist. And now he became the atheist editor of their national magazine, all from just going to a seminary. And that was his story. Now, every atheist will tell you different stories on how they became atheists. But anyway, I thought that was rather fascinating. But when it got down to the bottom line, as I talked to lots of atheists at this convention, all of them just had a stark religious faith that there was no God. And they predicated it on just things like, oh, well, the Bible's full of errors, or there's evil in the world, and because there's evil, God can't exist. And as you listen to these clips coming up now of the atheists, particularly these first few clips of just Madalyn Murray O'Hair. We'll get to the other atheists as we move through this television series. You'll get an idea of how they argue and how really they don't want to defend their position. They just want to attack you, and you'll find every logical fallacy inherent in their arguments, from ad hominem attacks, where they attack the Christian, to by calling them names, to just coming up with all kinds of fallacious argumentation that's easily refuted from either Bible texts that they take out of context, or misrepresenting data. Well, it's all there. But with that said, we're going to go to those clips now, and we'll be back on the other side.
But what I mean to say is this, that God is so thoroughly dead that it's like beating a dead horse to talk about him anymore.
All right, you did say that, by the way. Use that phrase, beating a dead horse.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that there has been any question for a long, long time, because I think it's a little over 6,000 to 8,000 years now that there have been arguments advanced as to the feasibility or the possibility or the probability of a God. This certainly was advanced by the Egyptians. It certainly was advanced by the old Chinese cultures, by the Indian cultures, long before your Christian God was ever invented. It was advanced in primitive communities all over the world. It certainly was advanced. Even the Indians in America had a great father. And there were as many non-believers then as there are now.
We have this whole idea of what is God. And you go out and you ask 200 different theologians what God is. One says it's energy, and one says it's love, and one says it's Jesus Christ, and another says it's the Bible, and another says it's this long, bushy-haired guy sitting up in a cloud. Nobody knows. These words cannot be interchanged because they have significant meaning for different people. And the most that we can do is try to reach persons knowing what newspapers carry, knowing what magazines carry, knowing what radio stations carry, knowing what religious programs are on the air. We have to use these terms in a kind of a way that everybody will understand, and that's it. What is psychosis?
Well, you to tell me, you use the word.
This is whether or not you are in touch with reality, and religion is not in touch with reality.
How do you know?
Kiddo.
How do you know, kiddo?
Come on.
How do you know?
You're talking about the grace of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
You couldn't define this for anything in the world, except in other nebulous spiritualist terms.
I can define it.
Well, wait.
No.
Now tell me about these Christian people.
Do you define it with other nonsense terms? When you say that God took away, or Christ, through his dying on the cross, took away your sins, this is ridiculous.
Why?
You weren't even
because
in
you don't believe
then.
it?
No, you weren't in existence then, and Christ isn't a historical person, and the whole thing is just a scheme in somebody's
the statement
mind.
you just made.
There's no historical evidence of Christ, and you know it. Now, don't be asinine and use
There isn't any historical evidence.
There is no historical evidence. The only evidence that there is in the mythology of the Old Testament, which nobody can understand, and in which a person is described in one manner in one chapter and another manner in another chapter. Christ is probably the most mixed-up person in the world if you take a New Testament definition.
You believe in the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth?
No.
And
it isn't a matter of not believing or disbelieving it. It's a matter of fact that there is no historical, archaeological, cultural, or sociological, and no proof whatever that he ever existed.
Please, can I ask you a question?
This matter, what I would consider as evidence.
Well, I'm trying to communicate with you.
No. The thing is what is there. And then you take an analysis of what is there. Now, the Romans were very fine historians. They really were. They kept a beautiful set of records in their Senate. If there ever had been a trial of Jesus Christ under Pontius Pilate, it would most probably be in their records. There is nothing. There is absolutely no historic proof. There's an interpolation in Josephus.
Wait a minute. That's an interesting point.
And everybody understands.
Who understands it?
Every single
Have you ever traced back the antiquity of Josephus's copies?
Among other things.
You have?
What, 15 years ago? And then I was done with it.
No, I mean, how far back have you gone with Josephus?
I don't remember.
No.
There you have it, folks. That was Madalyn Murray O'Hair in debate on national radio. Of course, those debates took place a long time ago. But as I said, since we don't have a live atheist here, we'll take one on tape so we can deal with some of their argumentation. But it gives the viewer at home a good idea how atheists argue their points. Now, Steve, you heard a lot of stuff there from one of the greatest or well-known atheists that ever walk the planet, perhaps, Madalyn Murray O'Hare, and I'm sure you'd like to make a few comments concerning what you've heard.
Yes. Well, first of all, just give you a little bit of my background. I mean, I've done a lot of things with logic. I have a PhD in chemical engineering. When I took the GRE in logic, I scored perfect. I work with computers now. And I was listening to her for the logical arguments supporting atheism. And I didn't find any. In fact, I didn't find hardly anything of substance until she made two comments. One, when she talked about the different religions and having views of God. We can agree just a tiny bit that when people reach up to God, they may have their own views and that doesn't prove anything, but if God would reach down to us, that would be different, and she saw no distinction there. But the thing that I took issue with is she made the factual claim that there was no historical evidence for Jesus. She said in the Roman Senate or something, if there had been evidence that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, then that would be something, but there's none whatsoever. Okay, that's a factual statement, but that's factually wrong. Let me ask you, if you're an atheist, what if there was historical actual evidence for the crucifixion of Jesus? What if there was evidence that he was historical? Then it's like her basic premise, her competency in the historical things will be blown out of the water. Okay, take the Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus, who lived around 55 to 117 AD. And in his history called Annals, 1544, he said that Nero was torturing the hated Christians. And he said that Christus, Christus, was executed under Pontius Pilate. But this mischievous superstition still broke out, and Christians were killed in cruel ways. So it's so with that, it's like we have the evidence that Cornelius Tacitus mentioned Christus being killed under Pontius Pilate, which blows her out of the water. Likewise, the Roman governor Pliny the Younger, governor of Bithynia in 112 AD, he talked about Christians who met before dawn. They sang a hymn to Christ as to a God, and they promised not to do evil. Lucian of Samosata, a 2nd century satirist, he also wrote about Jesus. He said, who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. And also says that, furthermore, the first lawgiver persuaded them that they were all brothers, one of another, after they had transgressed once for all by denying the Greek gods and by worshiping that crucified sophist himself, that is Jesus, and living under his laws. And this is from the Death of Peregrine, also called the Passion of Peregrinus, 11 through 13. Suetonius was another Roman historian, 120 AD, who says, as the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them from Rome. In Life of Claudius, 25:4. So these Roman historians, and just especially look at the first one with Cornelius Tacitus, show that yes, there is evidence of historicity of Jesus, and if you deny that, it's someone like the crazy people who deny men ever went to the moon, or deny the Holocaust, or other stuff. You're just out of the water as far as your knowledge of history goes.
This is true. And you notice she didn't seem to be too open to rational interchange. It seemed like she would start to raise her voice and get all upset about what's being said, and then start making these declarative statements, which, as you just pointed out, was a violation of logic.
I wouldn't say a violation of logic, maybe more an absence of logic. She didn't have anything to show, there's no God because of this, this, and this. She said, well, these people believe this and it was wrong, and these believe this and this is wrong. Well, show me evidence of what you believe is right. And I kept listening and listening, but I didn't see it.
Right. And I want to bring up this point now for the viewers at home, just because when you're dealing with atheism, as I stated in my opening statement, they put a lot of dependence on logic, and you're going to see a chart here where I'm describing I want to just describe some of the basic fallacies in logic, which you'll be seeing in this telecast for the rest of the series that we do here on atheism, because the atheists constantly are violating laws of logic and committing logical fallacies. And I want to name a few of them here, and you can see them on the screen, just so when we reference back to this later in the show, you'll know what we're talking about. So this is kind of setting the table a little bit when it comes to logic, but it's just a point that has to be used when you're dealing with atheism. You notice there on your chart, hasty generalization. It's insufficient evidence to support a statement. This is something the atheists do over and over again. Number 2, gross generalization. You'll constantly hear atheists saying the word all, or quote never, or quote always, or quote, everybody. They seem to pile everybody into one lump. It's a gross generalization when really the situation may be a lot more complex than that. Card stacking, number 3, a deliberate selection of evidence that supports a statement, ignoring facts that do not substantiate it. The fallacy of opposition. You'll hear this coming up in the debate footage about guilt by association. Say the Roman Catholic Church did something like the Inquisition or the Crusades. Well, then all Christians are guilty of this.
Or more to the point, the Egyptians and other people, she says, believe certain things, and therefore
Exactly.
Christianity is guilt by association.
Well-made point. Appeal to pity. The argument from misery. All right, because of suffering, handicap. Suffering does not make something right. Things of that nature. They'll argue from pity and the suffering of people, and why religion is wrong because it's caused suffering for people down through history.
Hey, wait a second here. In the 20th century, the group of people that have killed more than anybody else are the atheists. I just think of Mao Zedong and the Gang of Four in China. Think of Lenin and not so much Lenin, but Stalin in Russia. So if you want to take that argument to the extreme, nobody should be an atheist because atheists has caused so much suffering. Now, I'm not saying it's a valid argument, but that's just as
well. I've heard numbers that Mao Zedong killed up to almost 60 million in China. I've heard that Hitler killed almost 12 million, 6 million Jews and 6 million non-Jews, besides all the people that got killed in a war he started.
Right.
And then you got Stalin. I heard figures that he killed up to 18 million of his own people. And we know Hitler was a disciple of Nietzsche, who was a devout atheist,
right,
who of course later went mad and thought he was Jesus Christ, and his sister sold tickets. Yeah, but for people to look at this madman. But the thing is, all these people here, Mao Zedong, Stalin, and Hitler, were atheists, and it resulted in the deaths of millions of people.
Right. We can't forget Pol Pot and in the Khmer Republic, formerly Cambodia. So yeah, there have been religious people who have done very horrible things in the name of religion, toxic religion. But I think the atheists kind of take the cake there.
Exactly, because if there's no God, there's no standard, there's no moral law, and it's just whatever you can get away with, you get away with.
Yeah.
And if you're Joseph Stalin, you can get away with it. You kill 18 million people because you're the boss.
But then if you're atheist, you go back and say, well, don't believe in religion at all because some religious people have done bad stuff.
And that's guilt by association, another logical fallacy, which is something that's always reoccurring in atheistic argumentation. Now, just to go through a few more of these real quick, you find the red herring when you're debating with atheists, going off on a tangent that has nothing to do with the point or topic under discussion. Equivocation, point number as you see it here, more than one meaning is attributed to the words in the argument. So what equivocation is they'll use one word and then switch the meaning in the middle of the argumentation. So it'll make it look like it means what they're saying, but really they've switched the meaning in the second definition from the premise to the conclusion in the logical argument, and it's trying to pull a fast one, in other words. You got the false analogy. Try to draw a parallel where there is no true parallel. Such as an example is, if you were brave enough to take a shower, you are brave enough to swim in the ocean. That's the kind of a example you'd have there. And I could go on and on. The ad hominem, I've already mentioned that means that's Latin for against the man, attacking the individual's character other than their argument. Stereotyping, post hoc fallacy. I can go on and on with this. There's just a list. But as our viewers will see as we get into this atheistic argumentation and discussion, these logical fallacies, misstatements of facts, emotional outbursts that cause the atheists actually to be rude to people without almost proper consideration to the other people's dignity. But when you think about how the atheist has no moral standard, no objective lawgiver that can tell him what's right and what's wrong. He decides for himself what he thinks is right and wrong. So anyway, with that, Steve, unless you have any other comments, we'll go back to the atheists and hear some more. All right, we'll be back.
Here we have a beginning religion, and this beginning religion is predicated on the fact that a Jew has deserted his synagogic kind of faith and has tried to liberalize it. And
liberalize
that he has
what?
I'm talking about Jesus Christ trying to liberalize that particular element in which he
How
had...
could he liberalize anything? He didn't exist.
No, he didn't exist, but I'm talking about
What
the
would the
story
Jews
that
be
was
writing
written.
about?
I'm talking about the story which was written. So that you have this schemata of ideas that is slowly coming to the foreground in, say, the year 200 or 300 or what have you.
200 will do fine.
And what will happen then if the Jews decide that they want some sort of defense against this story?
Just deny that it ever existed.
They could do that, but the mind is peculiar, and some Jews may decide, we won't do that. We'll cast aspersions on his birth, and we'll say that he was really born of Miriam, that he was illegitimate, and we know his father.
Listen,
Some people
wait a
can
minute,
say that.
wait a
Other
minute.
people can say
Wait a
other
minute.
things.
Wait a minute.
So
How in
you
the
have
world?
a different
Oh,
kind.
come
These
on.
people, number one, they
Come
were
on.
illiterate. They knew nothing about history, archaeology. They knew nothing about science. They knew nothing about culture. They knew nothing, really, even about religion or the
You
religious
think
origins.
everybody
They
is
knew
ignorant,
nothing
but
about this.
everybody's ignorant but you on these things.
You know that these people at this
I don't
time
know
were
anything of the sort.
basically ignorant.
I know
basically,
nothing of the sort. Josephus was one of the best historians of the time, and
he
he
was
wrote,
not. And
he
Josephus
wrote-
is shot through
and
with all kinds
wait a
of
moment. He wrote a
theories,
very fine history, although it's not.
They have come up with an idea that has traditionally belonged to the materialists, and that is that the world exists. And from this, they try to derive proof that the world was brought into existence by God. And they always give these four definitions of existence. And always the first one violates the last one, because the first one says that from nothing, nothing comes, and the world could not have been spontaneously generated. And then they go back and they say, however, God spontaneously generated the universe, and he created it from nothing.
Because he existed.
Yes, who was his mother?
Now you're to the point that's interesting.
Who was his mother,
I'll
and
answer.
who gave him
All right.
the energy?
All right.
Who gave him all of the
Okay.
molecules,
All right.
the
Okay.
protons, the electrons,
All
the
right.
neutrons?
Good.
You see?
This is one of the simplest of
From
all
nothing,
questions to answer.
nothing comes.
No, it's a very simple question.
So he had to have some material in order to create this. And what you have to do is what we atheists have to do. You have to actually admit your complete ignorance about the universe, whether or not it has been existing, or whether it was spontaneously generated, or whether it wasn't. You have to say, along with us, that you don't know from nothing.
No, wait a minute.
Let's find out.
Because your answer is always God did it.
I don't have to say that I know nothing from nothing, because first of all, you will be the first to admit, I'm sure, that from nothing, nothing will come.
Except, of course, in God's case.
No, would you just answer that question? From nothing,
No, wait a
nothing will
minute.
come. You admit that from nothing, nothing comes, correct?
No, I don't admit anything.
Good heavens, woman, you must admit that from nothing, nothing will come.
But you said, this is your statement.
Will you admit it?
I have no idea if...
Oh, come on, this is absurd now.
This is not absurd.
In a world of science,
We have no
in a world
idea.
of science?
We have no idea. You have no idea. No rabbi, no priest, or no minister.
How about a
has
physicist?
Any idea? Any physicist?
Oh, they don't know anything either.
They have no. They have theories.
But
But they
theory.
have no absolute proof as to where the universe came from, or even our planetary system.
We're not talking about that.
They don't know.
We're talking.
No,
sir. We are talking about a statement. From
You
nothing,
have no
nothing
right
comes.
to say God did it.
Wait a minute.
What you have to say is perhaps by space exploration, perhaps by continuing study of physics, perhaps by continuing study of the particular elements that we have found so far, perhaps we can extend our knowledge so that we can make a calculated guess later. But right now, you don't know.
I am saying something.
Quit saying that you know.
I am saying something.
don't.
I'm saying something.
You're
which
not saying anything. You're just
Mrs.
funneling
Murray,
out a bunch of garbage.
Mrs. Murray, it's very easy
From
to...
nothing, nothing comes, but God created
All right,
a force from nothing.
Madalyn, please, let him make his point. Reverend
I don't think you
Doesn't have
can.
any.
I don't think... Grant the fact that from nothing, nothing will come.
I don't know.
All right, folks, you just heard Madalyn Murray O'Hare debating there on national radio on the Long John Neville show. And if you've been with us from the beginning, you know that we're doing a mock debate here, dealing with the atheistic arguments, giving the viewers at home a idea of what it's like to deal with someone who denies the existence of God. Well, Steve, we just heard her make a lot of arguments there, like the Jews knew nothing, that Jesus did not exist. She didn't like the 4 ideas for the existence of the universe we'll get into. But first, I'd like you to go ahead and deal with some of these things she was bringing up there in that last clip.
Well, first of all, she's saying again how Jesus knew nothing, and I'm sorry, Jesus did not exist, and we show evidence from Roman historians that he did. But there's also others beside the Romans. Marabar Serapion was apparently an ordinary Syrian guy who wrote a letter to his son, and we have no clue that he was necessarily Christian or anything. But he told his son to emulate the wise men of history who died for what they believed in. And he mentioned Socrates, Pythagoras, and the wise king the Jews executed, which would very likely refer to Jesus, especially since this was written about, just after 73 AD. In addition, the Jews themselves, in their Talmud, they mention a lot about Jesus. Now, just for example, it said that Jesus was guilty of sorcery and apostasy. He deserved execution, and the disciples of Jesus deserved to be killed. This is Sanhedrin 43, page 281 and 282. Okay, there's also the Talmud, the Babylonian thing. He said he learned witchcraft in Egypt. This is from Shabbos 104b. Also, Gittin 73a says that Jesus is in hell, being boiled in hot water. Okay, so, and it also says in Sanhedrin, also in 43a, it says that Jesus was executed because he practiced sorcery. It was taught on the eve of Passover Jesus was hung, and for 40 days before this proclamation was made. Jesus is to be stoned to death because he practiced sorcery and lured the people to idolatry. He was an enticer, and as such thou shalt not pity or condone. So all these Jewish people, according to people who deny the historicity of Jesus, made up all this stuff out of fictional character. Roman historians, who probably had no contact with them way west in Rome and didn't think much of the Jews anyway, they made up these things about Jesus. The Syrian man, Bar Serapion, made up things about Jesus. The early Christians, Clement of Rome, 987, 98 AD, and others after him, made up stuff about Jesus. All these people independently made up stuff about Jesus. And it's a lot to say this fictional character. I have to say it takes more faith to believe that he didn't exist than it does to believe he did exist.
Right, because the evidence you're bringing out is, particularly from the Jewish Talmud, the Jews are the ones that crucified Christ, and they're saying he practiced sorcery, he did all these things. That in itself proves that they're not his friends. They're actually, though, proving his existence, because it's right in their holy book about Jesus.
Yes, and the other thing I have to take issue with on Madalyn Murray's lack of knowledge on history, she was saying that the Jews didn't know anything. She mentioned they didn't know anything about science. Well, they didn't know modern science, they didn't know something. She mentioned they were illiterate. Well, actually, people could write in the city of Mari prior to the time of Abraham. People wrote in Egypt, and that's how we know so much about Egyptian culture from before and during and after the time of Moses.
What year are you talking about?
About, let's say, 1447 AD or so.
You mean BC?
BC in Egypt. And since that time, we even have schoolboy exercises in Palestine, talking about Balaam, son of Beor, for example. So you had a lot of people writing then, and the Jews were literate. And so it's like, do you have to make up just bald lies about history to make your point? And speaking of her point is that Jesus' Christianity is wrong. And therefore, I guess if Christianity is wrong, atheism must be right or something like that. But she hasn't really showed any evidence of atheism. Just try to ridicule other stuff, and I haven't seen much there.
That's a logical fallacy in itself. Just if Christianity is true, does that mean that atheism is? I mean, if Christianity is false, does that mean atheism is true? That doesn't follow logically.
Yeah, right. But of course, she hasn't even proved Christianity is false.
Exactly. Now, she also brought up the point about the existence of the universe, and she's saying they always bring up these 4 arguments, and of course, here we have it on the chart. The 4 arguments Madalyn Murray O'Hare was talking about as they got in their debate about existence. If something exists now, something has always existed. So if there's nothing, then there's just nothing. But if something is there, then there has to be something that has always been there in existence. Okay, so number 1, we have 4 possibilities for the existence of the universe. That which seems to exist is an illusion. Actually, nothing exists.
But who's doing the seeming?
That's right. Usually, that's one argument, but most people don't take that seriously because we can calculate with precision the 75-year arrival of Halley's Comet, for instance. There's all kinds of calculations you can make to show that things aren't an illusion.
Yeah, that sounds more like an Eastern religion kind of
Right.
argument. Okay.
Oh, something does exist. That which exists is self-existent and eternal. Okay, well, if something exists, which would be us and this table here, this pen in my hand, paper in my hand, the building we're in, this argument is saying that which exists is self-existent and eternal. But I know, for instance, 100 years ago, this pen wasn't here. Neither was this paper. Neither was I, or this table, or this building, or the cameras that are filming us. So it's obvious that this is all contingent. This is not self-existent and eternal. So this argument doesn't work. That which exists is self-created and eternal. Well, this is a logical fallacy in itself, because for something to create itself, it would have to exist. It would have to exist before it created itself, which is totally absurd. It couldn't do this. It cannot be self-created, because by logic, it just doesn't happen the way we understand it. So that only leaves one other possibility. Wrong, wrong, wrong. That which exists has been created by something that is self-existent and eternal.
Or I'd modify that, something or someone.
Exactly. But, for the sake of this logical argument, we know that these don't work, but the only other possibility then leaves that as we see a contingent universe, that something outside of the contingent universe that we see and are in created this, something or someone, as Stephen. And we would argue that someone is God Almighty created all this, and he is not part of the creation. He is outside of the contingent universe because he himself is not contingent himself.
Now, one thing which was a real flaw in logic is that on the tape, she said that she made no claim to answer if something came from nothing. She admittedly had no answer on that, and she said, well, atheists can't say where everything came from. She says Christians can't either, because who was God's mother? So her assumption was that because the universe was created, therefore God had to be created, and Christians can't answer how God could be created. And we can answer that very easily. God was never created. God was always there. God had no father or mother, and we have no problem with that. And so she wasn't able to see that God is not a part of creation. She wasn't or didn't want to see. And so she wants to talk about God being always there. We have no problem with that. She wants to talk about the creation always existing, but to say God and creation are the same, that's where she sort of kind of was unclear in the concept.
Right, and plus that's the drawback of her materialism, because she's restricted to what she can see by her five senses in a physical universe. But God is outside that physical universe because he's not part of it. But anyway, we're out of time for this particular broadcast. We're going to pick up with our mock debate with these atheists in show number 2. So if anyone would like free information, get on our mailing list for our newsletter. Just call or write. The address is right at the end of the show. I want to thank you for being with us. I'm Larry Wessels, the Director of Christian Answers, with our Director of Research for Christian Answers, Steve Morrison. Steve, great to always have you here. And join us again next time when we argue with these atheists. God bless you all.
check out our websites. BibleQuery.org. This site answers 7,700 Bible questions. HistoryCart.com. This site reveals early church history and doctrine, proving Roman Catholicism is not historically or doctrinally viable. MuslimHope.com. This site is a classic refutation of Islam, a counterfeit religion created by Muhammad. Free newsletters are also available.